on, stop messing about.
Splendid! Let's have more drinks.
Oh, no, come on, let's go for a walk. There's a smashing front here.
There's a smashing one there and all.
The Carry On films are a phenomenon of British comedy. Their saucy seaside humour reflects a national obsession with sexual innuendo, female anatomy and bodily functions. The humour may have been coarse and the performances little more than caricatures, but despite these shortcomings, The Carry Ons are amongst the most popular films in the history of British cinema.
See, the Carry On movies were like the dirty postcards brought to life. You had Sid the lecher.
Come on, Nurse, just a quick one while Sister's out of the ward.
No, Mr. Roper. Dr. Tinkle says it's not good for you.
But I've been smoking for years.
No.
I mean, they ought not to be funny, but they are. They just are. They're just delightfully charming. And even when they're not funny, it doesn't matter.
You may not realise it, but I was once a weak man.
Once a week's enough for any man.
We settle for less. In the end, we know we're not Hollywood. We know we're never going to make Titanic. We know we're never going to find a Jim Carrey. So what we do is we get that great repertory ensemble player thing together. You sat down for a Carry On film, and you knew what you were going to get.
No, this isn't going to hurt.
The Carry On team are sort of the biggest bunch of loonies who are allowed, to move about England without being restrained, and that the people who really liked them were people who could feel superior to them, and in feeling superior, you sort of put them down, and they were really laughing at the deficiencies of the people in the films.
The four men most associated with the Carry Ons are Kenneth Williams, Charles Hawtrey, Sid James and Frankie Howard. Four men whose deficiencies included promiscuity, wife-beating, compulsive gambling and chronic alcoholism. Four men whose dark and often troubled personal lives informed their on-screen characters. The most infamous of these was Sid James.
Sid James has been dead for over 22 years. And yet if you took his picture and showed it to any kid in the street, they'd all say, Sid James. Wah, wah, wah.
With his battered looks and smutty laugh, Sid described himself as the eternal dirty old man, an apt description for an actor who was a legendary drinker, gambler and womanizer.
Sid James was Sid James. What you got was, who he was really on screen. I mean, he was a hard-working, hard-drinking, hard-womanising, hard whatever bloke. He was a man's man, really.
You can get Sid James, who you think of as a kind of bookie character, really. The rough diamond and with the face like the dissipated walnut.
Sid James couldn't have acted Sid James. Nobody could have. Marlon Brando couldn't act Sid James. You've got to be Sid James and just notch it up a bit.
Sid's larger-than-life image was based on a lie. He frequently concealed the truth of his past, claiming he had been a boxer, a diamond smuggler, and a jockey, none of which were true.
First of all, he wasn't born Sid James. He was born Sidney Joel Cohen. He was Jewish. He was born in South Africa. He was 33 years old when he set foot in London. He'd come to Britain to be an actor, so in everyone's sense, the first 33 years of Sid's life didn't exist, and he took great pains to hide that. His legend was that he was a fairly good boxer, semi-pro boxer who'd suffered a few bouts. That's where the ears came from, that's where the nose came from. What he was a very good hairdresser, and certainly the best ladies' hairdresser in Johannesburg.
His job as a hairdresser brought Sid into contact with many beautiful women, who he pursued relentlessly. This was a weakness he would indulge for the rest of his life.
Sid James had that sort of rather battered colonial look and that sort of sense of being a bit of a ladies' man, which I believe in private life he was not averse to feminine charms, and but always one felt in a rather amiable way that it would be very hard to call him a real you know, a vicious womanizer, but probably just a bit of a dog, you know, a bit of a naughty hound.
Sid James' image as the Carry-On team's lovable rogue disguised a darker personality.
Sid was a womanizer. He'd had various girlfriends. He fell in love in Sid's sense with a girl called Toots Delmont. Now, Joe Delmont, the father, was probably the richest man in Johannesburg. Took an instant dislike to Sid because he, in many ways, could see where Sid was going and what was in Sid's mind. Could do nothing to stop the marriage. They eventually married. Toots announced that she was pregnant. Sid literally went into orbit, hit her a few times, totally denied the child. They stayed married. The child was born. At this time, within weeks, he'd started an affair with a receptionist at the Carlton Hotel where his salon was. That was Meg Williams, who would later become wife number 2.
I thought you said there were no patients here.
Well, they're not exactly patients, Doc.
Well, what are they doing here then?
Well, actually, they're my wives and kids.
Your wives?
Only these 5 here. Come on, I'll introduce you. There we are. There's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and last but definitely not least,
Friday.
That's it.
Well, I'll be damned. Well, at least you've got no problem with what to do with your spare time.
Oh, I don't know. There's not much doing at the weekend.
Sid had twice impregnated other stylists at the salon, and Joe had stepped in with offers of money and houses in what was then Rhodesia, and they went off and gave birth further up the continent, and there were 3 South African illegitimate children, which sadly a lot of Sid's relatives in this country, and certainly his friends, knew nothing about.
Have you got a large one?
I've had no complaints so far.
If we roll on the tape for another 10 years, Sid tends to use women. He becomes, very sadly, a woman beater. Countless instances before his arrival and after his arrival in this country where if Sid didn't get his own way, he would use his fists, and usually on women.
In 1952, having divorced his second wife and with 3 secret, illegitimate children, Sid married Valerie Ashton. By now he had become a compulsive gambler. Valerie did her best to control the situation by managing Sid's finances, giving him an allowance of £5 a week from his wage packet.
What do you mean, me wasting time?
Well, you never win anything on the horses, do you?
How ignorant can you get? I've told you. I work it out scientifically. I study form.
Why don't you win sometimes?
Can I help it if they don't run scientifically?
Sid was a gambler. I mean, he was a born gambler. In his teens, Sid went off to work in a circus for a few weeks. He would bet on which elephant would enter the ring or leave the ring first.
He would sit in the corner and try and get some bets on the 230 with a bit of luck. Without his wife finding out, dear Valerie didn't like that too much.
When he would go down the betting shops and place his legendary bets on horse races, he was known as Sir Sid, because he always had a bankroll of money in his pocket and would whack it down on the table and say, "That's my bet for the day." And they'd take it and completely trounce him.
I have to say, I don't think it's much of a secret that Sid did like a couple of quid on the GGs. There was no secret about that. In fact, I think he was, I'm not sure what the word is it gambleaholic or something, whatever it is, but if there was such a thing, Sid was jolly nearly one. But he did spend a lot of money on gambling. And I think Val, his wife, very, very sensibly tried to keep it in check.
People say that Sid James was a rough diamond on screen. He was off screen. It was a bit of an in-joke when it came to Carry On Up the Khyber, calling him Sir Sidney Rough Diamond, because that was his nickname.
My father, who are those people?
That light of my darkness is Sir Sidney Rough Diamond, the British governor, whose benevolent rule and wise guidance we could well do without.
All 31 Carry On films were made at Pinewood Studios. They were produced on a very low budget. The Carry On producers were notoriously mean and underpaid their stars. With heavy gambling debts, Sid's financial situation was placed under further strain due to the low wages that he received. Like his co-stars, Sid was on a buyout, a contractual agreement that was to cause much bitterness with the other Carry-On players.
Because the Carry-On films were filmed in very quickly, and they've got a very tight budget, they couldn't have anybody playing the big star. You've got to get into your costume, get on the set, do it and go.
Sid's first film in the Carry-On series, Carry-On Constable, the script demanded that Sid emerge from the top of the stairs, walk down a flight of stairs and walk out of shot. What actually happened was that Sid emerged, tripped, rolled down the stairs, and it was cut. The budget and the programming was so tight that instead of simply picking Sid up, dusting him off, putting him on the flight and letting him walk down again, which is 4 or 5 seconds, they cut it from the script and moved on to the next scene.
My agent rang me. He said, "Do you want the good news or the bad news?" So I said, "The good news." He said, "You're in the next Carry-On picture, Carry-On Matron." I said, "Wonderful. Hang on a minute, what's the bad news?" He said, "You're not getting paid."
They said to me once, "Angela, if there's anything we can do for you, all you've got to do is ask. If there's anything we can do, just ask." I thought, oh, how nice, how nice. I said, "Oh, well, actually, do you think you could send a car for me every morning?" I mean, they vanished into the shrubbery. They just vanished. And Sid James came up to me and said, you'll learn, you'll learn. I mean, they'll do anything for you, but nothing that costs them any money.
To support his reckless lifestyle, Sid James ran a variety of scams on the set of the Carry-On films. He often received gifts from companies to endorse their products on screen.
He did a deal with a very well-known whiskey company where Sid would take delivery of a case, 12 bottles of whiskey a week, provided that that bottle or that brand was in every film he appeared. Now, once you've learnt that trick, watch Sid in a film, and you'll see somewhere there will be a bottle of whiskey in the background with the label turned towards the camera.
Look, Gladstone, if nobody ever comes here for treatment, what is the good of spending all this money on medicine? I mean, look, there is masses of it. Masses. Just look at that. Whiskey?
Sid was given 3 cars, brand new cars, to promote, and basically as gifts. Sid would be seen in this brand of car. 2 of them arrived on a Friday. They were sold by Monday, and the money went into Sid's gambling pot.
Sid was the Carry-On team's rough diamond. With a string of female partners, 3 marriages and a trail of broken hearts, Sid's life took another dramatic and ultimately dark twist when he fell in love with one of his Carry-On co-stars, Barbara Windsor.
Not now.
I'm Nurse May. I was told to report here, sister.
I'll be with you in a moment.
Hi. No, sir, you mustn't.
Carry-On Camping was produced in 1968. It took the campness of the Carry-Ons to a new height. While Sid James represented the heterosexual side of Carry-On, 3 of the male leads were homosexual: Frankie Howerd, Kenneth Williams, and Charles Hawtrey. These actors brought to their roles a level of campness new to British cinema audiences at that time.
Bursting to know what it's like inside a tent.
I see. All right, Miss Dobbin, I'll attend to this customer.
Thank you, sir. Splendid girl, and so helpful. Do you know she's been showing me how to stick the pole up?
Camp isn't the word for him. I don't know what it is. He's just from that strange, etiolated epicene quality that is was remarkable and very funny.
The great thing about Charles Hawtrey was he was camp as Christmas. He was a mummy's boy with a capital mummy, but he was very different to Kenneth Williams. Kenneth Williams was obviously an academic, obviously wanted to work with the greats and was somehow slumming it. Giving it his all, but slumming it. Charles Hawtrey is an icon of British comedy, worked with Will Hay, been in films throughout the 30s and 40s and 50s, and was still somebody, huge face, who insisted on travelling everywhere by public transport. And you knew that this was a man whose bum was happiest on a bus.
Charles, a difficult figure because seemed quite unfriendly towards people. People liked him and respected him as a career. He worked with Groucho Marx and Will Hay and Max Miller and George Formby and all these greats of comedy. But come the carry-ons, he had a bit of a drink problem, or a lot of a drink problem, and he couldn't really control it towards the end. He was in them a long time. He was in them from 58 to 72, but towards the sort of late 60s, he was drinking a lot, and Peter Rogers and Gerald Thomas couldn't really cope with him. I mean, he came in drunk, and he couldn't remember his lines, and it was too much. And at the end of the day, the star of the film, as Peter Rogers would tell you, is that, you know, the carry-on title, whoever you are, whether you're Sid James, Kenneth Williams, or Charles Hawtrey, you know, you're not bigger than Carry On.
By the late 1960s, Charles Hawtrey's drinking was out of control and caused difficulties on the Carry On set. In his last performance in Carry On Abroad, Hawtrey played a camp, mother-dominated alcoholic. Scriptwriter Talbot Rothwell was deliberately satirizing Hawtrey's increasingly sad life. In 1972, Hawtrey was sacked from the Carry On team because of his drinking. He took semi-retirement in Deal, a fishing town on the Kent coast, where he lived a lonely and shambolic life. Although a celebrated Carry On star, he became notorious with the locals because of his alcoholism.
Sometimes we used to get a call from his house, and he'd give us a little list saying what drinks he'd like delivered there. It was normally bottles of sherry or gin, sometimes some mixers. So I got the impression it wasn't just for him, but maybe he was having people down as well. But I don't remember ever having actually picked anyone else up from his house, apart from himself.
He was very unpredictable, even before probably the drink. And I think his family had a long history of senile dementia as well, which people say in later years in life sort of affected him greatly as well, you know, combined with the drink.
He's a very lonely man. Very, very lonely man. I didn't know him when his mother was still alive, but apparently he missed her a great deal. And when he'd had a few drinks, if you were sharing digs with him where his bedroom would be next to yours, you would hear him at night talking to his mother.
Away from the Carry On films, Hawtrey found work in theatre, where his heavy drinking continued.
I met a man who'd worked with him on pantomime, and he says that to me that they would lock Charles Hawtrey up, the police, because he'd be after the performance he'd get so drunk that he'd go off and cause abuse to everybody. They'd lock him up in the cells, and the company manager would have to come and fetch him the next day to go to the performance, and he would wander on in that performance and not know what he was doing, what scene he was in, and they would gently guide him by the arm and take him off again. It's sad really, because apparently there would be a great round of applause and cheers when he walked on, but by the end of his first scene people would be talking among themselves. It would be so awful.
We were playing a town hall in Telford, quite a big one, 800 seats, pantomime, and he'd found a pub in the town in the morning that served cheap doubles, and I'd gone looking for him before the matinee because it was an unusual matinee. It started 1:30 instead of 2:30, and I thought he might have forgotten. And I found him in this pub. He said, "Dear boy, wonderful to find you. It's also cheap in here. I'm on doubles. I'll be back in a moment. I'm just going to the loo." So I said to the barman, "How many's he had?" He said, 5. I said, "What, 5 large gins?" He said, "No, 5 large gin and it's." I said, "What, 1 measure of each?" No, he said, "A double measure of each."
I mean, the fact was that he was good. He was good copy. You know, he would stagger down Deal High Street half cut, and you know, and swear at the taxi drivers and smash windows in pubs and things. And unfortunately, you know, that sells papers.
Well, I've been in his company in Deal, where I went in a pub one day, and it was full of what do they call them? Marine bandsmen, I think. That was hilarious to begin with, but after about an hour or two I disappeared and went to another pub and left him there with these bandsmen. He was chatting the whole lot up, and it got very embarrassing. I'd rather gather the following day the landlord asked him never to go in his pub again.
He did have a great love of young men, and I think he had various partners throughout his life, from maybe 1 to 2 at a time, who knows, because he was a very private man, and I don't think many people got close to that side of him outside of his immediate circle.
Everybody knew he was gay, but you never really saw anybody with him. He would like to talk in gay company, but you never see him wandering off with anybody. Probably was too drunk at the end of it even to walk off with anyone anyway.
While Charles Hawtrey lived an openly gay life, Kenneth Williams was never fully at ease with his homosexuality.
I think Charlie had a life that was sort of out of control a little bit, and Kenneth wanted that because all his life was so fiercely controlled. That's the bit that he wanted, and was never going to find. Strange that it should happen, really, to Charlie Hawtrey, who was such an unpromising specimen physically, even less promising than Kenneth himself was. And yet he was able to have this sort of life. Charlie lived an uninhibited homosexual life, of course. He lived by the seaside, and he had all kinds of sailors and ex-sailors parading around his house.
For Kenneth Williams and Charles, it was a great release, I suppose, being in the Carry On films, because they could be outrageously camp. And around the same sort of period, about the late 60s, when the Carry On films got more and more camp, that Kenneth Williams was doing Julian and Sandy on the radio, and he's, boner to bardy dolly old eek and all that business, and which was, of course, the underground language for gay folks to communicate.
Get away. Do you know, I haven't done this since I was in the army. At a camp concert.
This is no laughing matter, Gorth.
I say, you mustn't call me that. Not when we're on special duty.
Oh, yes. Well, Agatha, then.
Thank you. And I shall call you... Now, let me see.
Call me Ethel. It's my grandma's name.
If Grandmama could see you now, she'd be so proud.
Well, to work. To work. Are you ready, Agatha?
If you are, Ethel.
Kenneth Williams and Charles Hawtrey in particular are both, sort of really mad. You would not get away with people having a consistent film career now, behaving like that on screen. If you've not been brought up on Kenneth Williams, someone talking like that, yes, and the nostrils flaring, and this is him being sort of vaguely normal, you realise it's a bit of a shock,
Kenneth Williams did confide to me once. He said, it's all right for Charlie Hawtrey. He said, he can go into a pub, pick up a couple of sailors, and he's happy. Because I couldn't do that. At all.
Kenneth Williams was brought up in a very working-class family in the Caledonian Road in Islington. And I think that would have been frowned on. Homosexuality would very much have been the very devil itself. And I think he had that instilled in him in a very early age. His father was very domineering in that respect. He couldn't stand any sort of effeminacy at all. And that's why I think Kenneth turned very much to his mother, who was the guiding light in his life.
His whole persona was dominated by the fact that he never really was convinced that he was ever going to have a relationship of his own, except with his mother. And so he lived alone, always lived alone, never shared his domesticity with anybody. Was very reluctant to share even his basic living quarters with a visitor. He wouldn't let people use his bathroom, that sort of thing. He kept the top of his stove wrapped in cellophane. These were obsessive tendencies that he knew about. He was immensely self-critical.
Kenneth Williams' most successful relationship was with his mother. Their intense bond precluded Williams from having any other meaningful relationship.
He didn't have any close friendships. There was no real to and fro with anybody. And I think the only way that he could impose himself on the world was to be bad, really. Was to let something else out.
Kenneth Williams had a certain degree of notoriety within the corridors of Pinewood. He had a particular trick that he liked to play on any visiting actresses, any passing tea ladies, anybody that was female and happened to be in the vicinity. The trick was referred to by him as the vag trick.
He came into my dressing room once and just flashed his willy and stuff and stuck it between his legs and pretended he was a girl. And I was very young. I was absolutely horrified, and I buried my head in my hands, and apparently I said, "Oh, how horrible, what a horrible sight. Like, what's my mother going to say?"
There was a legendary tea lady called Edna who stalked the corridors of Pinewood with her rattling trolley of biscuits and green chinaware cups. Kenneth Williams was midway through Carry On Henry. He leapt out, threw his robes to one side, and there he was in all his glory, or gloryless, if you like. And she looked up at him, eyed him up and down, looked at his crotch, looked back at his face, and said, "One lump or two?" Or in your case, none at all, I should think.
Kenneth Williams was a very odd man. In one way, he was just a practical actor. That was, he would, "Where, what's the job? Yes, all right, I'll do that. Yes, what time? Yes, where?" And that was it. And on the other hand, he was, his mind was seething with all sorts of doubts and problems in his own private life. His own emotions were playing havoc with him, and he managed to juggle those two things: the hard, cold professional and the very vivid, emotional man. And he managed to carry the pair of them with him all his life. Quite an achievement, really. One felt, oh, please relax, please allow yourself to be things that you're fighting against. Stop fighting, just enjoy life more. I don't think he quite got as much out of life as other people.
Well, the trouble nowadays, matron, is we're breeding a race of weaklings, neurotic idiots, with no emotional stamina or physical stability.
He uses emotions on the screen. When you look at him in Carry-Ons, he is shouting, he is being terribly snide in one scene, or he's being terribly ebullient in another. Everything and he would go and get him back in the car to take him back to his home, and he'd be terribly quiet, listen to classical music and read books on philosophy and so forth. Quite different. It's like he was a man working inside out, where most of us, we're terribly straight in public, and then we go home and kick the cat. But I think he did it the other way around.
Oh, I'm all right. All right. Why shouldn't I be all right? Yes, I'm fine.
He was a homosexual, and he couldn't adjust to that. He couldn't come to terms with it. He wasn't happy with it at all. He would play up on it, and everybody knew what he was in his circle. But I don't think he was ever really happy with that. And he certainly didn't appear as though he could have a normal relationship with anybody.
He would pick up guardsmen in the usual inner London way of those times, and plenty of those came back to his flat, I think. And then he would say, had the tradiola or traditional contact, and it was fabulous, it usually was. I think this was mutual masturbation of various kinds. Not penetrative sex, I think, because he had a horror of that.
But surely you must have had it before.
No, I've never had it. Never had it. I've never had it. Never had time to have it.
Well, there's a very strong sexual drive there towards things that he was very much afraid of, such as sadomasochism. I think he had a slight longing to be involved in that, but he knew it was a world unto itself with rules of its own which were dangerous, and being, not a strong person physically, he might very well be overwhelmed, which in a way he also wanted, because his real fantasy was to be swept up by strong muscular arms, an experience he never really had. There is one mention in the diaries of a kind of masochistic episode where some young lad gives him a few belts, but I think that's the only instance I can recall in the whole of the diaries. But it's something he needed to experience, yes. But he couldn't approve of it intellectually. At no time did he do that, and that's why he had this tremendous tension and repression right throughout his life, right to the end.
Outside!
While Williams lived his life vicariously, Frankie Howard was the gay world's answer to the womanizing Sid James.
Please turn over.
Oh, dear. Much more of this. I shall have the best-known backside in town.
Oh, slight bruising, certainly. Yes, no bleeding. Good.
Just like the service round here.
Did that hurt?
Of course it did.
Good.
Sorry, missus, but Frankie Howard was not just camp. He was outrageously, shamelessly gay. And he tried on with anybody. His chat-up technique was quite interesting. There's a producer called Richard Wilcox who tells a wonderful story about how he was trying to interview Frankie for a possible show they were going to make together. And they met in somebody's flat in Mayfair, and Frankie, just opening remark, pours him a drink, says, "Oh, I've got this pain in my shoulder blades." He said, "Do you think you'd give me a massage?" Wilcox said, "Well, I'm not too sure about it." He said, "Frankie said, I've got the ointment here, and the tube of Vaseline." So Wilcox looks even more nervous. And Frankie then takes his shirt off. No, believe it or not, drops his trousers And Wilcox said, Frankie, look, I'm not like that at all, I'm sorry. So Frankie said, well, please yourself, but if you haven't tried it, you don't know what you're missing. He was a terrible fellow for that sort of thing.
Yes, there's quite a bit of bruising there. You landed on your coccyx.
I did not. I fell on my back.
Your coccyx is at the base of the spine, Mr. Picker.
Is it? Well, it's the first time I've heard it called that.
I had the great pleasure of working with Frankie Howard in the last pantomime he ever did in Stoke-on-Trent, and I was brought in as his dresser. They knew Frankie could be difficult, and he did try all the come on with me, come to bed with me and all that business, and I wasn't standing any of it. So he would sit down and talk to me and start to discuss all sorts of subjects, and I found him to be a very, very serious man.
Frankie was assailed by demons all his life. I think from the moment he got up in the morning to the final time he fell asleep at night, he was his own worst enemy in many ways. Basically, it was insecurity. Frankie Howard was very much the oddball of the outfit. First of all, he was a late starter. He came in, I think, about the 14th film, made in 1968, and very much he came in as very much a loner. He wasn't quite part of the team.
Frankie Howard's time at Pinewood Studios was often spent alone, away from the Carry On team.
But Frankie could be seen on the set at Pinewood, in a corner by himself, mulling over the script or reading a book, and you approached him at your peril, because before any scene at all, he suffered from enormous stage fright and insecurity.
I think he felt that team was a very strong team, and I think he felt a little bit threatened by the fact that Kenneth Williams and Sid James and Charles Hawtrey and these great actors were around him, when he was really he considered himself just a stand-up comedian.
Frankie Howard was also a very self-conscious man. There's a story that he had one of the production staff at Pinewood sacked because he inadvertently walked into Frankie Howard's dressing room when he was in there and he wasn't wearing his hairpiece. And he was absolutely mortified that somebody saw him without it.
He was very self-absorbed in himself. He would analyse himself and he'd talk about him, think about himself, perhaps to an unhealthy degree.
If you tried to compliment him, no matter who it was, he would change the subject. And I think he was very distrustful of compliments, because he'd had a bit of a nervous breakdown in his career, when his career was going at a very low ebb. And I think from that moment on, he never trusted what people told him about his talent. And I think he always felt he was winging it a bit, and he never quite knew when it was going to stop again.
I think Frankie's most loyal fan was his mum, Edith. Now, they remained terribly close. She lived in Eltham right up to her death in 1962, and she was 69. He would visit her every Sunday. They'd have the Sunday lunch together, and she remained fiercely loyal to him through thick and thin, through all those troughs, and she rejoiced at the peaks, and she helped see him through the low points. And she, I think, was one of the abiding strengths in his life.
What's going on here, nurse?
Oh, sister, he won't let me take his underpants off, the silly boy.
You're darn right I won't, and I'm not a boy, as you'd soon find out.
Come now, Mr. Bigger. We don't want to lie in our nice, comfortable bed with our nasty old pants on, do we now?
Madam, what you do in your bed is your own affair.
Mr. Bigger, all patients must wear pajamas or a bedgown.
Look, I don't care about that. I'm not letting her take them off. I mean, her a mere chit of a girl and me a fully matured male animal.
Mr. Bigger!
All right, sister, that's quite enough. I'll handle this. I don't suppose you regard me as a mere chit of a girl, Mr. Bigger?
Well, you said it.
Very well, then. It wasn't so bad, was it?
Well, they were a present.
By 1970, the lives of the four main carry-on stars were in disarray. Frankie Howard was tormented by insecurities. Sid James was a serial womanizer. Charles Hawtrey was a drunk. Kenneth Williams was suicidal. Each turned to their friend and co-star Hattie Jakes for support.
Who would have thought a towel would have made all that much difference? Oh.
Well, Hattie Jakes, by all accounts, was a very down-to-earth, very lovely woman, and very motherly towards people like Kenneth and Charles Hawtrey in particular. And I think that attracted Kenneth, because obviously, with having had a bad time with his father, Louis, his mother, was the great light in his life. And I think he turned to Hattie and Joan Sims and Barbara Windsor for similar sort of comfort.
Hattie Jakes was, without doubt, the most loved of the Carry On actors. Everybody adored Hattie Jakes. She looked after all the Carry On cast. She kept everybody in line. She kept morale high. Away from the film set, when things like Christmases and birthdays came round, she always remembered them.
She was somebody that you could go to and sit down and talk about your problems. Even Kenneth Williams, who was introverted to an extreme over his personal situations, he would always spend whatever Christmas he could over at Hattie Jakes's.
If Hattie was comforter to Hawtrey and Williams, then she was Sid James' confessor.
Hattie Jakes was a long-standing friend. They'd known each other for a long time from the Hancock days. And then when her husband, at that time, John de Maizière, moved into the Hancock's half-hour series, they became closer. And it was in many ways, Hattie was part of Sid's conscience. He was always been nagging him about his womanising, about his gambling, about his friendly con tricks to earn himself extra money.
Because of her size, Hattie's talents as a serious actress were overlooked. Characterised as the fat lady, she was always in a supporting role.
Hattie Jakes, I think, was very conscious of the fat jokes. They made her career. I mean, Tony Hancock did it, the Carry-Ons did it, and Eric Sykes did it, and she made a great living out of these fat jokes. But I think they made Hattie very insecure as well in terms of the way. She would have been liked to have been looked at as a woman, not a fat woman.
She's a fantastically sexy woman. For a big chick, she's hot to trot. She's got those lovely little hands and very delicate and precise. And she's also got great authority.
She was never the object of ridicule. You were always invited to laugh with her rather than at her. Peter Rogers said in his obituary tribute to Hattie Jakes, she was a very large lady, but not in size, but in heart.
If Hattie was the carry-on mum, then Barbara Windsor was the comic version of a sexy, bubbly blonde. It was inevitable that Sid James would pursue the carry-on sex symbol until she gave in.
Barbara Windsor brought that sort of bawdiness with her that the shows needed. She was the counterpoint to Hattie Jakes, who was respectability with a burning desire deep inside. Barbara was all out front, literally, in so many films. I mean, everything you ever heard about Barbara is the thing to do with her bosom.
The first pair of bosoms I saw on a big cinema screen belonged to Barbara Windsor. That's true of every bloke who's about my age, late 30s, early 40s. The first boobies we looked at were Barbara's.
And flee!
Barbara Windsor was the metaphor for sex. Everybody sort of agreed that Barbara Windsor was tremendously glamorous, which I think, with no disrespect to her, a bit sort of debatable. She was postcard glamour.
You know, okay, there's that element, yes, you're laughing at women's bodies, yes, you're laughing at sexual stereotypes. Yeah, because that's what comedy is. It's sexual stereotypes. And if you do it with a bit of wit and a bit of flair, and you do it with great character actors like Kenneth Williams and Charles Hawtrey, you're onto a winner that will live forever.
Oh, Sadie, just a minute.
Vic, you in the bathroom?
Oh, God, blimey, get back inside, quick.
Sid James pursued Barbara Windsor relentlessly. Both were married, but Sid continued to harass his co-star until they eventually had an affair. It was a relationship with a fateful outcome.
Barbara Windsor had appeared in several carry-on films towards the end of the 60s. Sid had noticed her as an actress, but not as a person. He suddenly became aware of this very bubbly, very attractive, boisterous, happy blonde. Instantly fell in love, in Sid's own words, again, in his way. The chase was on again. He had to have, in every sense, Barbara Windsor. Several people have said that if Sid hadn't been married, if Barbara hadn't been married, it might have been the real thing for Sid and Barbara.
At that time, Barbara was married to gangster Ronnie Knight, who was a friend of the Krays and had introduced Barbara to London's underworld.
Ronnie Knight was in and out of prison. One of the times when he was out of prison, word got to Ronnie that Sid was chasing Barbara. Sid and Val went off for an evening's entertainment. When they returned to their Ivor house, they discovered there'd been a break-in and the house had been rearranged. Nothing was broken, nothing was stolen, but the message was there to Sid to keep away from Barbara. So Ronnie knew what was going on, and that was his shot across the bows, if you like, to Sid to keep away from Barbara. That was temptation to Sid. That was the chase was intensified. The greater the odds, the greater Sid had to win. He went all out for Barbara.
The man got older. That was probably part of the reason why stuff like camping. He was in his late 50s. Barbara Windsor was playing a 16-year-old schoolgirl. There was a bit of a difficulty about that. But then again, Sid gets away with it because Sid, as I say, is Sid. He can do that sort of thing. But come Cowan and Dick in 1974, the man was 61. And to chase 25-year-old girls is a bit dubious.
Blimey.
Dick, what are you doing in here? Get out of here!
I'm sorry. If I'd known you were in here, I wouldn't have come, would I?
Yes, all right, just get out of here quick before somebody comes in.
You haven't got any soap on that bit?
There are instances where Barbara would be talking to people, Sid would appear at her elbow. Bernard Bresslaw would help Barbara back onto the stage during a performance. As they went into the wings, exited to the wings, Sid would pounce and say, "What are you doing? Leave her alone, don't you ever touch her." There were arguments, there were near fights. At the end of the day, after several weeks, several months, they'd actually got together. They bought a flat just up the road in Pimlico. They were living together in essence, but it was becoming all too heavy for Barbara. Barbara said, or gave Sid the ultimatum, that this has got to end. You're hurting me. I can't sleep. I can't live. We've got to separate. At that time, Sid told Barbara, just as she was going off to a tour in Australasia, that if Sid didn't have Barbara, he would be dead within 18 months. 17 months later, he died on stage. This is a man who had been warned that if he didn't cut his lifestyle, his career, he would die. He was back on the cigars, he was back on the drink. He knew what he was doing to his body. He knew what he was doing to his heart. He was getting through 2 or 3 bottles of whiskey a day. He was certainly getting through 10 cigars a day. He was overeating. He was doing everything wrong. And as far as Sid was concerned, that if he couldn't have Barbara, he wanted to die. And I'm convinced that he pushed himself right to the very edge. And he had another heart attack.
Sid James died of a heart attack on stage during a touring performance of the ironically titled The Mating Game at the Empire Theatre in Sunderland. He was 62. The Carry On films in which he had starred were now in decline. Kenneth Williams was living alone in his Euston flat. The loss of public adulation, the frustration of a career restricted by the Carry On films, and the pain of an unfulfilled private life had become intolerable.
He was virtually mentioning suicide from when he started them. It was a trait throughout his life. He would get very, very depressed. And the more the public loved him, it seemed, the more depressed he would get.
It's a debasing experience. I mean, I hear that Kenneth Williams loathed playing that part. And he was a terribly good actor. The fact he didn't get better parts, well, that's unfortunate.
Every other time he was offered a Carry On film, it was, this is going to be my last one. I really can't go through the motions on this again. It's driving me mad.
In the last, 18 months of his life, I think he was in severe pain from different sources. He had back trouble, he had ulcers quite badly, which the doctors seemed unable to remove. And this sort of disoriented him, I think. It actually began to unhinge him, loosen his grip on reality as a whole. He uses this term, I haven't seen it elsewhere, I am a suicidalist. And a few months before he actually did die, he had a kind of dry run, He had this bunch of pills that he didn't use for medicinal purposes. He called those his poison. They were strong barbiturates. He took a couple of these and then got, as he said, cold feet. He didn't go any further. But that was a rehearsal for the real thing, which duly came.
Kenneth Williams died from an overdose in 1988. The coroner returned an open verdict, but it was more than obvious that Williams had committed suicide. he had starred in 26 of the 31 Carry On films. With Sid James and Kenneth Williams dead, the tabloid press turned their attention to Charles Hawtrey as he lived out his last lonely days drunk in Deal. The reclusive Hawtrey gained unwanted media attention after a fire at his home in 1984.
Apparently he was in the bedroom with a young man, doing what you do, and I don't know what happened, but the house caught fire. Obviously fire engines were called, there was a big fuss, and he was dragged naked from the bedroom with this young man. And I think it badly affected his esteem, because although he'd never hidden the fact that he was homosexual, he didn't want particularly to advertise the fact outside his immediate circle. Towards the end of his life, Charles Hawtrey got very ill indeed, and he was told that, I think he got gangrene in the legs, and he was told that he got to have both his legs cut off or die, basically. And according to good old Barbara Windsor, he said, "No, I want to die with my boots on."
It was inevitable that the years of alcohol abuse would take its toll on Hawtrey's fragile health.
He phoned me from the hospital bed the night before he died, and apparently he had blood clots in his veins or something. And he said, "I've just been reading a book, dear boy, and I think I can get my veins taken out and put in with pig's veins. I'm going to have a word with the surgeon tomorrow." But the following day he was dead.
The reclusive comic actor who made millions laugh died alone, ignored by show business friends and colleagues. Scheduled to star in what was to become the last Carry On film, Carry On Columbus, Frankie Howerd passed away the week before filming. His death brought the true Carry On tradition to a close.
On a lighter note about Frankie's death, I think Frankie would have liked this too, that he and Benny Hill, another great comic, died on the same day, Easter Sunday, 1992. And they both had heart problems. And in fact, when Benny found Frankie going to hospital, he sent him a note saying, "Stop trying to steal my act. I do the heart jokes." I thought that was rather nice.
The main Carry On stars are long dead, but their legacy continues. Television reruns have brought the film's saucy seaside humour to new audiences. 40 years on from the first Carry On film, what will be their lasting appeal?
Carry On movies are rather like British wine. Anemic, overrated, and do not travel well.
We tend to be failures, and there is something gloriously seedy and wonderfully ridiculous about the Carry On team. They're not failures as such, because they're kind of too good-spirited to be sad or to be bitter. But, you know, for all their schemes and for all their, you know, whether their scheme is merely to get a lusty weekend with the right bird, or whether it's something grander to make money or to save a hospital or whatever plotline it is, when it fails, or if it ends in a bun fight, it sort of doesn't matter.
Although we pretend to be politically correct these days, there is still a large, proportion of us that laughs at the underdog and laughs at the person more unfortunate. We pretend not to. That's the thing about this kind of, the pretense of being politically correct, but actually just under the surface, spastic porn we're talking about, in a lot of these films. They love it, they lap it up.
And there are things in the Carry On films still that have given people almost like cinema urban myths. Like when you go into hospital and they want to take your temperature with a rectal thermometer, the thought always goes through your mind, is it a rectal thermometer or is it going to be a daffodil?
Colonel, whatever's going on?
Come, Matron Shorty, you've seen a temperature taken like this before?
Yes, Colonel, many times. But never with a daffodil.
never mind Orson Welles with Rosebud. The image I cherish is Wilfrid Hyde White with a daffodil up his jacksie.
This is fantasy. We're living in a fantasy world in England, and I think it's time we woke up and really looked films and situations like Carry On films right in the eye and said, this is crap, look, dump it, we can do better things. This isn't British heritage, it's not Stonehenge, it's crap. Why don't we stand up and say it's crap? And then forget it.
If you don't agree with that, you'll love what's next here on 4. Hattie Jakes does the rounds in the classic Carry On Matron.